Such a pleasure to be here. This is a city I don't get to very often as a filmmaker, but I end up in places like this. I realize it is possible for a documentarian to find a little niche in the world of Hollywood films. And I don't speak a lot because this is a very long film, and I talk incessantly throughout it. So you'll hear plenty of me coming up. But again, thank you for coming, and I hope you enjoy the film. It's fun to watch, and I'm going to stay and watch for the first 15 minutes, and then I'll slip out, get a light, and I'll be back for question and answer. Thank you very much.
And Robert Abele, this is Ross McElwee. Do you recognize the Ross you see in SHERMAN''s March?
That wasn't me. That was some older brother that I lost track of. I didn't like the guy very much.
I mean, how long has it been since you watched it in its entirety?
I didn't watch it in its entirety. I have seen it quite a few times. And what's different, of course, is this is a restored version, and the sound, the audio, the picture is just amazing to me, because before that all I had was 16 millimeter prints, and those I watched maybe 50 times, start to finish. So, this was, for me, a treat. Looking at what I did see.
Can you take us back to basically like how you arrived at this type of filmmaking? Because I know this was kind of like a real, leap forward for you. So talk about the personal documentary style that you kind of came to.
Well, as a film student, I was really influenced a lot by those practitioners of cinema verite, Fred Wiseman being the sort of head of all of that. And of course he died recently, but he practiced the kind of filmmaking in which observation was everything. And you just simply were alert enough and open enough to the world where you could capture things happening without directing them, without rehearsing them, and that from the kind of footage, you could put together a film that would be engaging. And I was quite taken by that. Other people who were doing it at the time, Richard Leacock, D.A. Pennybaker, the Albert brothers, Albert Maysles brothers, they were all influences on me and a lot of other people my age at that time. And I even made a film or two, which I guess you could call filmed in the same style observation of cinema verite, as it's sometimes called. Richard Leacock was my teacher, and he's the one who does the Sherman's.
He's the first voice we heard.
Narration, yes. But there was something about it that wasn't quite right for me. It didn't suit me, and I felt also that I had always written a lot, and what was missing was some sort of more subjective component. The whole idea behind observation of cinema verite was that we never saw or heard from the filmmaker directly. And I guess, I wasn't the only one taking this different tack. I felt that what could perhaps enrich a film shot in cinema verite for the most part would be a direct participation by the filmmaker, both in terms of his appearance occasionally in the film as a character, the same way that other people appear, but also from hearing his voice, his thoughts, his subjective musings.
So when you started filming, did you know you were making an epic? Did you know what you were doing, or was it sort of unconscious, the filming early on?
Well, it sort of started off unconsciously. I really was going to make a film that was indeed going to be a portrait of the South, the modern South of that time, in the 1980s. And it was, I planned for it to have people I knew in it, including my relatives, but that also to be able to find other things that were relevant to what I saw as a subject. I was sort of thought the film would probably tackle more directly the whole notion, the whole issue of racial relationships in the so-called New South, and how new was the New South. And those were all ideas that were churning in my thinking about the film. And that set, well, I plunged into depression as a result of that, and then I started thinking, I don't think I can make the film I thought I was going to make. Maybe I could make both films simultaneously. I didn't really know what I was going to do. I started filming things that just seemed interesting to me, included in that. And later on, I suddenly realized there is a way to put these things together, and so I did.
So the later on, I mean, are you at the end of the day like taking notes on what you shot, looking for possibilities, or are you deciding, let's just wait till I see what I see in the editing room?
Well, I took notes. You have to remember this was 16 millimeter film. There was no way to kind of look at it at night when you came back from the shoot. You really go to whatever, so look at it. You have to send it away to the lab, wait a minimum of 3 days before you could see what we call the rushes back then, the dailies that would come back from the negative that was printed in the laboratory. And you really didn't know what you had until there's an awful lot that can go wrong in shooting 16 millimeter. And it's just that waiting period. So it was time to think about what I've been filming and maybe what I should try to film over the next few days. The one thing I did have were audio versions of what I filmed, the synchronous sound, and I did make a point of listening to that very carefully, making notes. I kept a journal, sort of notebook full of just descriptions of what I did. So in that way I did what I could, but again, 16 millimeter limited things quite a bit in terms of planning and taking the next steps.
So when you would meet the women, would you say like, if we hang out for a couple days, I'm gonna film every day, or would you kind of let that possibly be something that would be a surprise to them each day?
Well, I did tell them I was making a film and I looked in it exactly then, but for the most part they agreed. There were some who didn't want to be filming about in the movie, no matter who they are. And there were a few I filmed and they just turned out not to be as interesting as the others. I had the first projected version of this film for some very hardy souls who were friends of mine, filmmaker friends of mine, up in Boston. It was 8 hours long.
Director's cut.
One Saturday we spent looking at this thing. It actually held together as a film. I mean, it had, I could tell why things were put together in the order they were. But, despite the fact some of them saying, release it as an 8 hour film. I decided I can't possibly do that and came up with this film eventually.
Well, now it would be an 8-part docu-series, and it would not be nearly as charming in that format.
Exactly.
So are you, is the idea that you thought I'll get mini portraits of people, are you thinking that these people will turn into mini portraits in the film?
For the most part, yes. I didn't know for sure. For instance, this one woman I meet early on who was a playmate of mine when I was 8 or 9 years old, married, and she, I thought maybe she would be possibly a portrait in the film. I just didn't know, but I could tell after one filming session, she gave me kind of signals, those signals that you get as a filmmaker, which are nonverbal and can tell certain things. It wasn't going to work as making a full-fledged portrait, but she does make a cameo. And it's that one, she's the fashion model who comes in, and I surprise her with my camera, and then we talk about being kids and how much she loved playing Superman with all things. But I knew that was probably, and plus she was leaving and I was still with my family. So it just worked out that it didn't work.
I feel like you made 2.5 hours. Is this a movie about you over 2.5 hours, or is it a movie about 5 months in your life?
It's both, I think. It's 5 months of filming or being on the road. And really, those, the times that I was out there, I was constantly ready to film. I didn't film every single day. But it was, it was arduous. It was a wonderful adventure too, and in some ways a lot of fun. But another way, it was hard work. And so, but in a way, it is a version of where I was in my life at that point. you know, there were certain things I exaggerated and played with. And obviously, I'm aware of the humor of certain situations and the irony of certain situations I find myself in, and I address those indirectly in my narration. But it represented the way my life was back then.
I mean, coming from the South, but at that point, I think you were living in Boston. Did you feel like what was the greatest insight about the South that you came to by making this?
Since my personal life.
Yeah, I mean, like in terms of like, you thought you maybe knew the South to some extent.
Well, it actually turned out to be the way I thought it would be. In the 1980s, it's, you know, not quite the same now. It had, I think, in my opinion, more character. It had certainly less people moving there to work. Now it's been inundated by Yankees, as we like to say. Who come down from the South because there's employment there, the weather's better. There are a lot of reasons. It's a great place to raise a family, you know, in North Carolina and the South in general, I think. It's a great place. It's a great place to do that if you're of a certain political and racial certain background. You know, it's not that for everybody. But all of that, nothing really surprised me about that. What surprised me were the people, the individuals and their lives and the details of their lives. And that was constantly surprising me. I just was discovering things as I filmed that I never would have imagined represented these people, these lives. I was intersecting with. And so that was one of the great pleasures. And that, of course, is one of, I think, the reasons that people, Fred Wiseman, Ricky Lee and Maisels made those films is because there was always something unexpected that could occur if you just invest the time being with people long enough with the camera. You'll discover things that you just didn't know that were there. And that certainly was true of the filming I did here.
There's also the, I mean, and there's the resonance now with this idea of looking for connection in a time of anxiety. Did that feel like looking at it again, even a little bit tonight, did that come through?
Well, this was filmed in the 1980s before the end of the Cold War, before the Berlin Wall came down. And though I'm a little bit ironic and different about how I refer to nuclear Armageddon, it was a very real thing. And that dream, that experience I had of watching the detonation in the Pacific was a very frightening experience to have, especially as a young kid. And all of that was buried inside of me, and I think I became more and more aware of it as I made my way through the South, filming things I filmed, because the South also, despite it having been crushed in the Civil War, actually found itself being haven to a lot of the militaristic institutions of the United States. Nuclear submarines were based in Charleston, South Carolina. Plutonium processing plants were all over South Carolina. There were several very active military institutions. Citadel, for instance, it's sort of West Point of the South was there, South Carolina. So the more and also people's love of firearms in the South, I mean, they were everywhere.
Those preppers are very, the doomsday people, they're creepy.
Yeah. They were, as you said, creepy. There were also maybe one set of people that I never could relate to personally. I felt they were living a dangerous life. One that was a lot of bluster, a lot of absurd rhetoric, not unlike, if I may be political for president, our current president and his cabinet. And that was, to me, dangerous. I had no empathy or sort of individual. And so I watch that footage now, I think of them as a different subset of people in the film. Everybody else, I found a way to make a connection with it.
The women who what did they think of how they were portrayed in it?
Well, you gotta remember, this is pre-internet, pre-digital video, nobody was really carrying a camera out. I don't think they took me seriously at all. And my own family barely took me seriously in terms of whether this passion I seem to have would ever come together in any way that would be of interest to anybody other than myself. And I think, they were good-hearted about it, and they put up with me, and I think that's part of it, but I think also part of it, also like the film from a kind of reader point of view, that sort of meant that I found something interesting about them, and that they had whatever it took to become interesting enough to be on a film, in camera, was something they relished, and so I gave them that. None of us, myself included, realized the film would be seen as widely as it was when it was released.
What do you remember of showing it for the first time? Where was it shot for the first time?
Well, there were several first times. No, seriously, we did I guess the first real time it was shown was up in Boston, at the Institute of Contemporary Art there. It was a fairly small audience, smaller than this audience I came to see it. And I may tell you a longer story, I'll do it. My father came up with that, and he was a doctor and surgeon. It was a very different lifestyle. And he sat next to me during the film, and I said beforehand, Dad, I have no idea if this is going to make sense to you, but I hope you can find some enjoyment in it. And after the screening, the audience was wonderful. Everybody was laughing hard, the right places, and being quiet in the right places. I could tell the film sort of worked. Test screenings of it, but didn't really ever show it to someone, to a group of people I didn't know before. It was the first time. My father finally said something to the effect of, "Son, I never knew you were so funny." And I actually think in that sentence there was something about our relationship, where I could have said, "Well, Dad, I never realized you had a sense of humor." And I loved my father, and I know he loved me, and I think the film was a kind of breakthrough, and he stopped worrying about me being able to make a living somehow for myself. That's all he ever said. He didn't particularly press me to become a doctor the way he and his father had done, the way my brother was. It was more a matter of whatever you do, first of all, should bring you some sort of enjoyment from film, and secondly, you've got to be able to earn your own living, because family's not rich, we're okay, we're middle class, but you're going to be on your own. And it was clear, having seen that film, that I could at least do that, even if I had to supplement my income from films by teaching, that was okay. So that worked out well. But no, I think that was, you asked me about first time it was filmed, I think. That was certainly one of the first times. Charlene actually came up for that screening. She was sort of wowed by it, and I think she went to subsequent screenings, and she was always a star. There
was a light within with her. Before you go to audience questions, I do want to ask, can you extol the virtues of film over digital?
I could. There's a lot that I love about the way the film looks, and even this, which has been filtered through the whole digital process, has some of those qualities. The grain, the sort of luminosity, the way color seems to be have a more muted and pliable presence on screen. But every time I say this kind of mantra has been said over and over again by filmmakers who shot film and shooting digital. It becomes less and less an issue, because actually digital cameras are really becoming quite good at what they do. And I'm not sure that the differences even, you can even tell some of the time. But more importantly than that, I think the kind of discipline that I learned, I had no choice but to learn. It wasn't because I had any particular great attributes as a film student, but that you have to learn to shoot 16 millimeter. And that really forced you as a filmmaker to look carefully at things before only had 10 minutes at a time before the film would run out. Everything would have to grind to a halt, even if you had other film already ready to go. Into separate magazines, you had to take the time to do that. And you've been filming something that's going on, so it means you're missing something. And reloading 10 minutes of film and then continuing. Very disruptive way to shoot. And I think digital, of course, allows you to shoot for an hour at a time, sometimes longer. In fact, some cameras that you have enable you to switch cards back and forth, and you could do that infinitely. Kind of assistant camera person can just keep plugging in a new card. You could go on for a while. Never end your filming. That was never a possibility with 16mm. So that filmmaking, and I remember many times thinking that the discipline of all that is something that just about lost at this point in the younger filmmakers, because they just never had to go through that kind of constraint of not being able to shoot all they wanted to. Now there are advantages. Sometimes I missed getting things because I ran out of film, or I realized I didn't have enough time to shoot as an event, so I just curtailed my shooting. Digital, that's obviously not as much of an issue, and certainly some of the filming I've done since I switched over to a digital camera, I've been grateful for the fact that I could keep shooting as much as I did because it yielded something that was very important to me often.
I just asked because Sherman's March is such a great example of it. Just the fact that it's on film, it kind of creates this magic of I need to pay attention to everything because he chose to shoot it, and it was precious. Questions?
Hi, thank you so much for being here. Kind of jumping off of that, I was curious, is that given that you were shooting on film and that brought its limits, did you, and because of this fundamental nature of making a documentary, you can't anticipate what's going to happen, did you develop something of like a gut instinct for when to film, or were there signs that you looked for to know when to stop rolling and when to cut?
Gut instinct is the question. I think it's basically that you develop gut instinct for shooting with this kind of shoot.
I think I did, but I don't think it was ever consistent. It always depended upon the situation, and it's not like I had a coded list of signals that would tell me shoot or stop shooting, because every single situation is not going to be different. So something intuitive happens, though. You're right about that. And I had a hard time understanding what that was, how to explain that. I think it's basically just learning how to pay attention, and you get used to paying attention with the camera on your shoulder, and somehow those two facts that you're there in person, the camera's on your shoulder, really can help you know when to film and when not to. But I mean, aside from that, I don't know that there's any particular thing that I would point to that enabled me to do the kind of shooting I did, just intuition.
Okay, let's go to the way back on the aisle in the back.
Do you thanks a lot for showing really interesting films. Do you think that a film like this could exist today, given the fact that everything is recorded, or was there part of the magic created from the fact that very little was recorded back then? And I guess how can we use that as a lesson to capture more videos or film in today's age, despite the fact that everything is not recorded?
Did everybody hear that?
That's of course a really good question, and especially if you've taught filmmaking, and you've taught both before and after. Let's say before the digital age, and then after it's taken over everything. The differences are there, and because when I teach, when my colleagues and I teach our courses, at a certain point we say you have to get off campus and you have to go find something you don't really know and film it in a way that's interesting. That is becoming harder and harder for them to do, and my direct, my ability to compare directly between taught the same class in, both situations. People are much more, suspicious of cameras now, as they should be, I guess. Also, there was no internet, when I was shooting this film, and certainly no YouTube, nothing like that. And so I think, people were much more relaxed about being filmed. It seemed like kind of a quirky thing to do. And they weren't afraid that anything really, dangerous was going to happen with their images. Now, of course, everybody realizes that anything captured with any cell phone could very well end up on the internet, and, we all know now, where that can lead. So yes, I think things have really changed. And as far as what I tell my students, I've shown them a lot of work, films made both in the digital age and the 60mm age. And I think they learn from watching that more than anything I say about other possibilities for their own film. Because you can always see how people who are determined to find a story and then somehow film it in such a way that it can engage, viewers, find a way to do that, even in the digital age. And, so it is still possible to do, but I think it's harder. And I felt that from many students who would sometimes come back empty-handed after having to shoot for a day because people didn't want to be filmed. That's simply what they did.
I was just curious if you ever saw the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once, because I heard that the counterparts theory segment like influenced the story of that movie.
I've heard that too.
The Daniels movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once, was inspired by Winnie talking about multiple, universes.
Yes, I heard that. The animals themselves. Well, you quoted them, I mean, I think it's true. There've been other people who've made films, and I sort of don't understand why they cite Sherman's March as a, reference point, but they do. And, counterpart theory, yes, that was sort of created by David Lewis, who was teaching philosophy at, Princeton, and, I remember after Sherman's opened in New York, it took a really long time to movie theater there. Someone finally told David Lewis to go and see the film. And he did. He made the trip from Princeton, and apparently came back and said, well, that woman, Winnie, got my theory absolutely correct. And I told her that. She was thrilled.
One more.
I'd just like to know some of your favorite depictions of the South.
Favorite depictions of the South?
Made by other people.
Yeah.
Or, because my favorite depictions are all included in Sherman's March. So assume you mean by other people. Well, I just came from North Carolina, and we were, my wife and I were walking around, downtown Durham, and suddenly realized, oh, there's the ballpark where the Durham Bulls play. And oh, that's probably where they shot some of Old Durham. It's a film directed by, Robert Shelton, I think, and had,
Kevin Costner.
Kevin Costner and,
Tim Robin.
Susan
Susan Sarandon. I'm gonna go through the cast.
You tell fiction filmmaking is not really. And we wandered around, and I have to say, remembering that film, brought back some very warm feelings about that depiction of the South. So I'd say there's an example, in fact, a film that I've seen that really rang true for me. I also want to say too that, two years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, there was a film released called Seeds. Did you ever?
Yeah, the documentary, black and white documentary Seeds.
Amazing film, and it's by a young woman named Brittany Shine, I think is her last name.
Yes.
And she just did what I did, and I didn't realize people could still do that. She went out into the world and found a group of farmers who had been filming in Georgia, I think. And they had the same farms that their ancestors had had. They became ancestral farmers, which is a kind of, I guess, a category that you fall in, get some assistance from the government when you reach that level. They've been farming the same land, 3 generations, same family. And, you know, that sounds maybe not that interesting, but the way she filmed it was just so marvelous. And, you know, partially because it's film and it's not a book, and it's very hard to describe it verbally, but just the patience with which she filmed it. It was a curiosity about their lives. Going for long car rides that seemed to be endless and not really knowing what you were filming and why, and then you hear the conversations of the people in the cars that they went to a church picnic or something. And I thought, this woman has kept the whole series, the whole tradition of kind of joyful, accepting, observational film very much alive. And you know, I've never met her. I don't really have any contact with her, but I thought that film just made me so happy that I do what I do, and that some people are still practicing.
Yeah, it's so great to hear that you love that movie. It is really great. What about that? Somebody should make a Cast movie, I think. Cast idea? I think somebody should make that. Right.
Actually, in remake, you know, there is film that I've just finished.
Tomorrow night.
Tomorrow night, just to put in a plug. But remake starts out in about somebody who wants to turn Sherman's March into a fiction.
That's
story would have been that.
But I also want to give you a chance to prepare everyone for the movie, for photographic memory, if you want to set everyone up for that. To end this.
Photographic Memory was a film that actually I made way after Sherman's March, 2010. I think it was released. No, it was released in 2011. Shot in 2010, and it's a very different version of a Ross character moving through his world. About his family life, married, 2 kids, so got 2 kids. Having some complications with his son, who's just growing up and becoming kind of embattled adolescent, kind of a hard case, and me trying, suddenly wondering what my life was like when I was his age. And what I was doing when I was his age was I was wandering around France, not really knowing where I was going, and taking school classes. So basically, photographic memory charts our parallel lives at that time. And
It's also wonderful. Well, thank you, Ross, for coming to talk about Sherman's March.